Guys, if you're catching this on replay, go ahead and skip to about the minute 30 mark. I'm going to wait for a few folks to come on in as I'm going live. So if you're watching this on replay, go ahead and skip ahead to about a minute 30 seconds. Hey guys, welcome in. Ooh. I'm going to catch that one at the end, but I've got your question. I'll go ahead and answer it since I have you right here on the front end. I like Fine right now. I just think it's a safer play this week. I do like Mon too. I think you've got two good options there. It's unfortunate you're not playing in a two quarterback league, but I do think Fine is sort of the safer option right now. He's got potential to throw 4 or 5 touchdowns. So, guys, welcome in. For those of you that are on live, my name's Joe DeSalvo, the voice of the CFF site. Here we are in week 5, and I can't believe how fast the season is going by for me. I know maybe not for some of you all. It just depends really where you're at. One thing about being associated with the college fantasy football site and really having the exclusive email available for a number of you all. It's crazy how I'm getting emails all over across the spectrum. Some of you guys in a little bit of a hole. Some of you guys have kind of tread water in a good spot to really make a run, adding 1 or 2 pieces, and then some of you guys are just killing it, blowing it out the water, undefeated right now. So, CFF site, many followers. The rosters are all over the place. The records are all over the place. But, it's a long season. And I say it's a long season because we still have more than 50% of the season to go. But we are in week 5. Maybe one of the most critical points of the week, of the year right now, because we're kind of getting into the weeks that are really kind of putting people in position, putting fantasy owners in position to be contenders. As we get into the season, you find yourself 0-5 in a keeper league, you're starting to build for 2019. 1-4, you're kind of in that boat, maybe thinking about it. But 2-3 after this week, 3-2, you're right in the thick of it. So hang tight, guys. Plenty to get to tonight. I've got a slew of notes here, guys. I've got the start bench we're going to get to. I'm going to get a number of your questions. These shows have been taking about 70 to 80 minutes every week. The format's different than it was last year. Getting a lot of positive responses on the way that I'm really just kind of tackling the matchups and really giving you my perspective of what I'm looking at in comparison to what we did last year, where we just sort of went through the rankings. I think the rankings kind of put you in my head. They're right there on the site, whether you're just looking at the regular rankings or the expanded rankings. It kind of puts you in my head. That's the culmination of all the homework that we do all week long. And so the expanded rankings are up. The projections went up this morning. And so we're going to go into the matchups, and then hopefully that sheds a little bit of light on where I have guys ranked in my rankings. There are tons of questions that come in between the times that I post them on the site and tonight's show. And I'm hoping that tonight, when we do the show, really the end of the homework for me for the week, and when I just kind of sit back and have a drink, it kind of lets you inside my head to show you where I've got all these guys ranked and why I do. So, with that being said, guys, I want to give a shout out real quick to the CFF site in-house league, the total points league that we set up on Fantrax. We actually attracted about 115 fantasy owners that signed on. It quickly, when you have that many people, you start losing folks really fast. I'd say after 1 week, 2 weeks maybe, it looked like we were dwindled down to about 100 active participants. Maybe after 2 weeks, looks like we went down to about 90. And then as of right now, it looks like we still have 60 active fantasy owners on the site. And here's what I'll tell you guys. If you're in that 60 number, and there's 60 of you all within 200, and maybe it looks like about 265 points, maybe 300 points of really just kind of being in earshot of those top spots, stay with it. It's a long season. You're building really deep rosters. I sent an email to someone today, or I corresponded with someone today. In another 2 or 3 weeks, things are going to get really tight where the depth starts really becoming a problem. You'll be able to make up some ground really quickly. But I do need to give a shout out to the Trojans, and I wish I knew who it was. I should have done a little homework on who the name of the gentleman was. But if you're listening to the show, he is out. He's leading by about 150 points over the second place team. He's got 1699. I'm sitting at 1467. He's about 200 ahead of me, and I'm creeping up there in sixth place. Again, I won this league last year, and in position within striking distance right now. But Trojans, congrats to you sitting at the top spot at 1699, Fighting Gamecock at 1546, and Team Razor Eater sitting in third at 1529. The two spots between me and third are at 1521 and 1481, so there's not a lot of distance, and I expect a lot of shift in the standings coming up in the next 2 or 3 weeks. But that'll do it for all the housework, house cleaning, guys. Let me go ahead and get to this week's slate. I know that there's a game on right now, Miami and North Carolina, and let me say this as we kind of go into the rankings. You know, topics of conversation this week, obviously with the transfer week right now being big. I think this is going to be typical for us as long as this rule stays in effect. You're going to see guys leave in what looks like or what seems to be free agency. We had Kelly Bryant leave over at Clemson. I was really it was really nice to see Jalen Hurts stay over there at Alabama. I mean, depth does matter at this particular point. I mean, if Trevor Lawrence goes down, what do they have? You can see what happened with Nebraska when Adrian Martinez went down. There's no depth behind him because Gebbia and the guys behind him had gone. But I will say this, you know, when we put the preseason fantasy guide together, I have a lot of say-so in what goes on with the rankings, and I projected Trevor Lawrence and N'Kosi Perry to sort of be the fantasy leaders for Miami and Clemson this year, and I thought it was only a matter of time. And it's not that Kelly Bryant was a bad quarterback. You can just tell from last year that he was not going to be the long-term answer at Clemson. And given the spring that Trevor Lawrence had, and you saw his limited play on the field in the first few weeks of the season, it was only inevitable that it was going to happen. Now, here's one thing. We're talking fantasy football. So I had an email come in today. Why do you have Trevor Lawrence ranked so low? I mean, it's his job now. I mean, imagine, look at the numbers he put up against Georgia Tech. What is he going to do now that the job's fully his? And here's the answer that I gave him. It's a very honest answer. He was a Clemson fan. I actually think Kelly Bryant was the better fantasy option. I just think Trevor Lawrence is the better quarterback for the team. And so we're comparing, what my job is and what I do is, and what I have fun doing is analyzing fantasy football compared to real life. I'm looking at the stats. I'm looking at the points that people produce. Kelly Bryant gives me 2 rushing touchdowns, 60 rushing yards, 2 passing touchdowns and 250 yards. You've really got to get into, Trevor Lawrence has to sort of get in the space and live in the space where a quarterback from Texas Tech or Washington State needs to be, where they're flinging it around 40 times a game, throwing it for 350 yards and 4 touchdowns to kind of equal what Kelly Bryant was giving you because of his dual threat ability. Dual threat ability rules in college fantasy football. So, just because Trevor Lawrence is the better quarterback doesn't necessarily translate to him being the better fantasy quarterback. So, with that being said, I kind of teed that up there, and let's get right into week 1. Into week 5, game number 1 on Friday night. We're going to go with Memphis at Tulane. I said a couple of weeks ago, Darrell Henderson, he's on pace right now to be the number 1 fantasy back in college fantasy football. You've got Damani Coxey, which I think is a good option, and Brady White at the quarterback position for Memphis. When you're looking at Tulane, they're at home. I think if you want to get Darnell Mooney in there, if you're in a deep FBS league, I think this is a good spot for him. I don't know about Darius Bradwell. You may sneak and get something out of him. Jonathan Banks at quarterback. But if I'm looking at one player from Tulane, it is Darnell Mooney, the wide receiver. UCLA playing at Colorado is the second game tomorrow night. And right now, I have to tell you, I'm staying clear of UCLA. I think unless you're in a Power 5 or /Pac Pac-10 specific, Pac-12 specific league. You're staying away from UCLA right now. There's really no clear-cut established leading ball carrier in that offense. And then when we look at Colorado and you've got a receiver over there like Laviska Shenault, who is obviously without a doubt a must start in this game. The other options you can give consideration to, Steven Montez, maybe even running back Trevon McMillan. And if you want to throw in Katie Nixon, you want to throw in Jay McIntyre, depending on your format, those are some other names out there that you can start. But for me, the clear-cut starter in this matchup is Laviska Shenault. Let's go to Saturday's matchups, guys. The first game, Louisiana at Alabama. I think with Louisiana, you're not going to throw anybody into that game. You'll be chasing points through garbage time. We're going to stay away there. In Alabama, there's a number of guys that you can start. The number one guy and number two guy, however or whatever order you want to put them in, would be Taiwo Tagovailoa, the quarterback, and Jerry Jeudy. Obviously, those are going to be the top guys. Let me tell you something about Alabama, and this is going to go back to the Clemson conversation with the transfers that are going on in college football. It almost seems like Alabama is letting everybody dip their toe in the water. They're giving Robinson a touchdown, Najee Harris a touchdown, Damian Harris a touchdown. Jerry Jeudy's going to get a few big ones over the top. And then it's like, let's give Devonta Smith some catches. Let's give Henry Ruggs some catches. We'll get the tight ends involved. It's like they're purposefully spreading the ball around just to keep everyone happy and nobody transfers. In my opinion, that's what it looks like. Look, those two guys that I mentioned are two fantasy studs, but right now, look, usually when you think of Alabama in years past, you've got a dominant running back. That's not happening. They have four guys that they can run out there. They can keep them healthy towards the end of the year, give each one of them 7 to 8 carries, and that seems to be what is going on at Alabama. And I think something similar to that is happening over at Georgia as well. Let's go to the Syracuse-Clemson matchup, guys, because I think this is really intriguing. For me, I'm a little nervous about Eric Dungey. He's not as high this week as he usually is. I have concerns about starting Eric Dungey this week at Clemson. I do think Syracuse can find a way to get some points on the board, but I'm not particularly sure if it's going to be Dungey on the ground. I think he may have to throw it, and when you're talking about passing it, is it going to be Sean Riley? Is it going to be Custis? I don't know which receiver could be on the end of those touchdown catches. Nykeem Johnson. I do think Syracuse is going to find a way to score some points. I just don't know how they're going to produce them. So for that reason, I'm shying away from recommended Syracuse players this week at Clemson. When you look at Clemson, I mentioned Trevor Lawrence at the top of the show. I think he's a solid option in 2 quarterback leagues. He's not my top option in a single quarterback league. I don't even know if he's my top option in a single quarterback Power 5 only league. I think it depends on your depth. I think T. Higgins kind of comes back into the fold now that Lawrence is the full-time starter. You've got guys like Justin Ross as well that could give you some production. In my opinion, and why I'm happy that now it's Trevor Lawrence's job exclusively, is that I have been on the train, and I've been saying this every week, of Travis Etienne. I actually believe that this makes Etienne a bigger fantasy factor moving forward. And I think if you've got Travis Etienne, you are going to continue to climb up and post better numbers as the season goes on. West Virginia playing at Texas Tech. Look, Texas Tech with 2 impressive wins back-to-back against Houston and against Oklahoma State. I think with them, you're running your typical guys out there. You're running Bowman at quarterback. I think you've got to get Wesley involved and high the wide receiver, considering that TJ Vasher looks like that he's going to be doubtful. The running back position for me this week with Texas Tech, to me, it's a little bit of a gamble. You don't know if it's going to be Felton. You don't know who's going to be the top running back, but I do like the wide receivers and the quarterback that I just mentioned. When you look at West Virginia, Will Grier, David Sills, Gary Jennings, Marcus Sims, all guys that I think you have to find a way to get into your lineup this week in a game that has potential to feature a lot of points. Central Michigan playing at Michigan State. In my humble opinion, Jonathan Ward, running back from Central Michigan, is dead. I don't know if he's given you much this year. He's certainly not. I will be shocked if he gives you something against this defense. Michigan State defense, right now, statistically, the number one rush defense in the nation. If you're holding on to Jonathan Ward right now, I think you just need to free up a roster spot and look somewhere else. I think this could be a bounce back week, a week where Brian Lewerke, the quarterback, needs to get going. This could be the type of matchup where maybe he turns a corner. It'll be interesting to see if LJ Scott plays. It looks like he should. He's probable, recovering from a hamstring injury. Just curious to see how many carries he will get. But I do think this has potential to be a good spot to start LJ Scott if you're in trouble when it comes to depth this week. Arkansas playing on the road at Texas A&M. It looks like Dev Waweli will not play. I think it's going to be Raheem Boyd, the running back for Arkansas. Quite frankly, I throw that out there just for if anyone wants to look at him and you have Dev Waweli, but I don't recommend starting any Arkansas players this weekend playing on the road against Texas A&M. Arkansas's run defense is respectable, but I still think if you have Travion Williams, you have to get him in there. He's a must start this week, and I think you have to get Kellen Mond in your lineup depending on your matchups. He has a very favorable start this week. I just think the guys that you hesitate a little bit on would be somebody like a Jamon Osborne, the wide receivers over at Texas A&M. Those would be the guys, Cameron Buckley's. But Jay Sternberner is obviously a must start at the tight end position as well. Let's move on to Indiana playing on the road at Rutgers. If you follow the emails that I have been posting out on the site, and you do have the exclusive emails, I'm concerned about Raheem Blackshear, and whether or not this is sort of, the end of the road for his good numbers. The matchups are going to get a little tougher for Rutgers as the season wears on. I think that actually starts this week. But for Indiana, I think it's going to be the Stevie Scott show. I think if you have Stevie Scott, you have to put him in your lineup this week, and he's the guy that I'm looking to blow up out of that I'm looking for to blow up out of this matchup in week 5. Army playing on the road at Buffalo. Let me go ahead and start with Army first, because I do think this could be a matchup. If you need some players in a deep FBS league looking for a sleeper, you play any type of DFS, and you can get the names of Kelvin Hopkins or Donnell Woolfolk for Army, this could be a nice grab for you. When you look at Buffalo, it looks like Anthony Johnson isn't 100%. You've got wide receiver KJ Osborne, who's actually posting some really good numbers right now. I think if Johnson plays, you have to get him in your lineup. He was preseason top 5, top 10 fantasy wide receiver. He's being hobbled a little bit. But I think you have to play him if he's healthy enough to get in there. If you have KJ Osborne, I think you throw him in there. And I think if you picked up Kevin Marks, depending on your matchups throughout your roster, you have to get him in there as well. And I'll make the same. I think that applies to quarterback Tyree Jackson as well. Moving on to Oklahoma State playing at Kansas. Look, I have some concerns on whether or not Taylor Cornelius is the long-term answer at Oklahoma State. I'm assuming he is as of right now. I haven't heard anything differently, but over at Oklahoma State, it looks like Dylan Stoner is going to be out. We know Jalen McCluskey transferred. I think you got Tylan Wallace and Justice Hill are definitely the must-starts at Oklahoma State. Over at Kansas, you've got Puka Williams sitting there for you. He's had 2 good weeks in a row. Here's what I'll say. Be careful. I've fallen in the trap of Kansas players before in the past. Very rarely do we get 3 and 4 consecutive weeks from them that are really good. I'm concerned if you have Puka Williams this week about getting him in your lineup. I think this could be a week where maybe you kind of take a wait and see approach to see if he's going to give you something on a consistent basis against quality opponents. But if you're in a pinch, you've got to go ahead and throw him in there. Temple playing on the road at Boston College. Every week we kind of go through these matchups, and every so often we hit a spot where I say it's all about the running back versus the running back in this matchup. And I think that's what we're getting with Temple and Boston College. You're going to get other guys that are going to factor into this, that are going to be a fantasy factor, maybe a Tommy Sweeney, the tight end for Boston College. But I think when people are looking at this matchup, they're looking at Raquel Armstead versus A.J. Dillon. And obviously, we're not sitting A.J. Dillon. I think if you do have Raquel Armstead, you do kind of need to look at your other matchups. That one does make me a little nervous. It almost seems as if the production from Raquel Armstead over the last couple of weeks seems too good to be true. Maybe it's not. Maybe this was the Raquel Armstead we thought he was going to be in 2017, and he's coming through in 2018. But I do say that this matchup does make me a little nervous for Raquel Armstead's owners. Bowling Green playing on the road at Georgia Tech. I think for me, Andrew Clare has been a little bit of a disappointment. He went over 100 yards in the season opener at Oregon. I don't think he's topped the century mark since then. After this game, they're going to be I think they're going to be exclusively in MAC play. Even though he hasn't had the year that I expected up until this point, I still think he's going to be really good when they get into the heart of conference play. Be patient. Maybe not this week on the road at Georgia Tech. I actually think Quentin Morris, people like Scotty Miller, could be decent plays for you as a flex option in deep FBS leagues. But I'd be concerned. They're playing against Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech's going to smash mouth. Georgia Tech's going to probably keep the ball. Georgia Tech's going to really shorten this game. The possessions are going to be limited. But I have to tell you, I love Taekwon Marshall in this matchup. We're going to come back to him a little bit later in the show. I'm going to give you some reasons why I love Taekwon Marshall, but that's kind of foreshadowing my start bench list. But I'm going to tell you why I like him so much. And I think maybe if you take an outside shot with Jordan Mason, I wish I would have seen a little bit more from him last week. I'd have been a little bit more comfortable this week. You got Searcy as well that I think you could take a shot on. But from that Georgia Tech offense, to me, it's all going to run through Taekwon Marshall this week. Virginia playing on the road at North Carolina State. There's a player in this game that I'm going to revisit in my start bench as well. Bryce Perkins has been absolutely on point for me in 2018. I was really on board with the Virginia offense. Olamide Zaccheaus has sort of been hit or miss during some weeks. I think this could be a good matchup for him this week. I think out of the Perkins, Jordan Ellis, Zaccheaus triangle, I like Zaccheaus and Perkins this week. Over at North Carolina State, last week I was told you I was a little hesitant on Reggie Gillespie because the running game was trying to get going. It looked like it hadn't had much life up until last week, and Gillespie punches 2 balls into the end zone. I think now he becomes a start consideration for week 5. I think at the wide receiver position, you obviously have Kelvin Harmon. I think you get him into your lineups right now because I do not know if Jakobi Meyers is completely healthy. I think he caught maybe 12, maybe it was even 14 passes in the season opener, and I think he may have only caught 2 last week, returning from injury. So I still have some doubts right now about Jakobi Meyers, but if you've got Kelvin Harmon, I think you've got to go ahead and get him in your lineup this week. UMass playing on the road at Ohio, 2 teams that have both given up a ton of points. I think for UMass, Andy Isabella is a must start. I think you need to give consideration to Marquise Young, the UMass running back. And over at Ohio, I think this really could be a monster week for quarterback Nathan Rourke. But I'm not ruling out the possibility of A.J. Ouellette and Malik Irons stealing some touchdowns and some rushing yards from Nathan Rourke, and maybe the wide receiver to kind of throw something in there to give you some production would be Poppy White for Ohio. So that's sort of the names that I'm looking at in that matchup. We're going to go to UL Monroe playing against Georgia State. Here's the one thing. Caleb Evans is going to be a must start. Marcus Green, the wide receiver for UL Monroe, I think he would be a must start, but he's questionable. He'll pop up on our injury report, I'm thinking, later tonight or tomorrow. He left last game with, I believe, a hand injury. I don't know if I trust whether or not, especially playing at a small college, we don't get a lot of news on him, on whether or not we can trust putting him into your active roster. The one thing that I do know is over at Georgia State, I think Ellington, the quarterback there, may be a decent play. But the one thing that I will say is that Georgia State's run defense has been really bad. Maybe, just maybe, you take a long shot on a running back like Derek Gore this week. Could be something to watch for because that Georgia State run defense is not that good. And maybe Caleb Evans, maybe somebody like Derek Gore does some damage on the ground this week. Kent State playing Ball State. Look, Riley Neal, the quarterback at Ball State. I thought James Gilbert would have done a little bit more last week against Western Kentucky. He did not. I still think you have to take a shot on him at maybe a flex position this week. I thought Woody Barrett's stats would be a little bit better for Kent State up at this point right now, but they have not. I think somebody like Mike Kerrigan is a sneaky wide receiver in a deep FBS league at a flex spot, or a wide receiver 3 or 4, depending on how many spots you go. And then I think the carries are going to split between Rankin and Shaw, and I don't know which way they're going to shake out. But those are all names that you want to kind of just add to your watch list and see how this shakes out as these teams move into the heart of conference play. Tennessee playing on the road at Georgia. It looks like Ty Chandler has gone ahead and made Tim Jordan fantasy irrelevant for the time being. And I think over at Georgia, I say the same thing for Georgia that I said for Alabama at the beginning of the show. It just seems like they're kind of giving drips and drabs to everyone. I mean, DeAndre Swift, I thought for sure was going to be a top 10, top 15 fantasy running back. Those guys, like Alabama's guys, they're only getting 7 to 8 carries. Definitely not seeing the workload as Chubb and Michelle did last year. So we'll pay attention to that as we move into the heart of the SEC play and as the competition gets a little tougher. But, guys, Georgia and Alabama, the competition is not going to be to their level. They almost seem like they're on a collision course for that championship game. But I'm just not seeing the studs at the running back spot that we thought we would see before the season started. Baylor playing on the road at Oklahoma. Obviously, we got Denzel Mims that's been coming back from injury, didn't do much last week. Quite frankly, I'm concerned about him this week. It seems to be a common theme that guys coming back from injury, you almost have to wait to see them have a good game before you put them in. And that's the chance you take because you're like, do I put him in or do I not put him in? And it's like if I put him in and he lays a goose egg or he gets 2-3 points, it does me no good. If I sit him on the bench and I miss out on a big game of his, it does me no good. I have to tell you this, and here's my philosophy. I would rather that guy be on my bench and have a big game and know that I have something from him moving forward than keep taking a chance with him every week and getting 3-4 fantasy points when I can at least be getting 12 to 15 points from a backup on my bench. And before I get, because I don't know where this game is right now, but that's where I stand with Kylan Hill, the running back from Mississippi State, when we get to him. 2 good games right out of the chute. It looks like he had a little bit of a toe problem in the 3rd game. Last week, I don't know what the offense was doing over at Kentucky. And now I'm like, 2 subpar games from Kylan Hill. You have to hold on to him because we've already seen what he can do, what his potential is. But I don't think you could take a chance on sticking him in the game at home against Florida this week. But the guy's got too much upside to throw him out there on the waiver wire. And I think when we get to that Mississippi State game, and I'll cover it right now, I think, look, it's going to be, the environment's going to be crazy, right? With Mullen going back to Mississippi State, it's going to be a wild atmosphere. If there's one player in that game that I'm throwing in my fantasy lineups, it has to be Nick Fitzgerald. And other than that, I'm just watching the game. That's it. Nick Fitzgerald, the only fantasy option in Florida at Mississippi State. I'm going to say that now for when we get to it on the schedule. Getting back to Baylor, getting back to Oklahoma, I think obviously with Oklahoma, you're staying with Murray. I think a big bounce back week for Marquise Brown, the wide receiver. CeeDee Lamb is going to be steady for you. I think Trey Sermon, you continue to get him in your roster this week. Over at Baylor, I'm not sure if I'm doing much. Denzel Mims, I'm sitting on. I don't even know if I'm getting Jalen Hurd in the game this week, either Charlie Brewer, any of the running backs. I'm not particularly on board with Baylor this week. Texas playing on the road at Kansas State. As long as Thompson is the quarterback, I like Isaiah Zuber, the wide receiver at Kansas State. He's the only play that I like. I think Sam Ehlinger could actually be a good fantasy play this week in 2 quarterback leagues. Colin Johnson and little Jordan Humphrey is actually solid, 2 solid wide receivers for him that are producing. So those guys are really good options as a flex spot, PPR leagues. But I think Ehlinger could have a decent game this week playing on the road, even at Kansas State. Cincinnati playing on the road. Let's see, Cincinnati playing on the road at UConn, right? So David Pindell has been a nice fantasy find for many of you guys, and I know whoever got him worked the waiver wire, and those are the type of moves that you need to put you over the top. It does seem like he's dinged up a little bit. It would not surprise me if he doesn't have as good a week as he has had up until this point. But if he plays, you have to get him in your lineup with the number of points that he's been producing. At Cincinnati, I'm looking at maybe a 2-3 headed monster between Ritter, the quarterback, and Michael Warren, the running back. I think if there's a third option in there, I believe it's Degara, the tight end, would be my third option to play for the Cincinnati offense. But those are the names that I'm looking at in that matchup. Pitt playing on the road at Central Florida. With Central Florida, they're going to spread it around too. There's one of those offenses. They are just so good, and they can score all the time, that they're spreading it around. I mean, one week, Otis Anderson won't get anything. Adrian Killens, I think, may have had 14, 15 carries last week, didn't score a touchdown. You've got Gabe Davis. You've got Dredrick Snelson. Nixon can get in there. Everybody can get a piece of the pie. I think this could be a good matchup for Killens this week. For some reason, I think he was held out of the end zone last week. He finds the end zone this week, but I love the passing game. If you have Snelson, you have Gabriel Davis, you get those guys in your lineup. I actually think that Quadri Allison can be a nice sneaky play for you at the running back spot. They're on the road playing at Central Florida. I do not think, no matter how, even unless Pitt completely gets run out of the building, they're going to stick to the game plan. And Central Florida's run defense up until this point has not looked great. I do think that this could be a closer game than what people think, and that Pitt running game could keep them in the game a little longer and control the clock and keep them into the game into the second half. So we'll see how that unfolds, but I do think Allison could be a sneaky play this week for the Pitt. Old Dominion playing on the road at East Carolina. Obviously, Blake LaRussa made that Old Dominion offense, it gave it a complete facelift, right? I mean, Jonathan Duhart was producing. It didn't matter if it was Williams or LaRussa, but now with LaRussa in there, that Old Dominion offense just looked different. I mean, they upset Virginia Tech. I don't know. We'll see. I don't like knee-jerk reactions to take guys out. I also don't like to go overboard with jumping on the bandwagon. So I am a little cautious. I would need to see it more from Old Dominion. I do not need to see any more from Jonathan Duhart. He is legit. He should be in your lineups. But Jeremy Cox had a big week last week, and he was way overdue. And congrats to all of you all that held on to him, because if he can stay in that type of form and stay conditioned and stay healthy, and he's got potential to give you 20 carries with 100 yards and a touchdown every week, then that's the Jeremy Cox that we predicted at the beginning of the season. So let's see if he can kind of hold and stay consistent moving forward. Over at East Carolina, Reed Herring was banged up. It looks like he's going to play. Last week I was kind of, I have these predictions on where I kind of think there's going to be a breakout game here or there for someone. Last week I thought it might have possibly been Jalen Moore. He ran for over 100 yards in the first quarter. I mean, he'd have run for 200 yards had that game even been closer. I had a gut feeling about Miles Sanders, and he went for 200 yards in that game against Illinois on Friday night. I'm wondering if this is the week that Trevon Brown finally has that breakout receiving game that we have been waiting for. Getting into conference play now and getting away from those early non-conference games. Offense has had a little bit of time to gel now. They've had that win over North Carolina. Let's see if this is the week of Trevon Brown. Coastal Carolina playing at Troy. One thing to note with Coastal Carolina, Kilton Anderson, the quarterback, looks like he's going to be out. He'll miss the game. Advantage Troy running game, advantage B.J. Smith. I'm not expecting the world, but if he can give you 60, 70 yards and a touchdown, maybe two, he'll be worth a flex spot in some of your FBS leagues. Western Michigan playing on the road at Miami of Ohio. We know that Miami of Ohio already lost James Gardner. I don't even know if I'm looking at any players in this game with perhaps maybe Levante Bellamy. He's the one guy I really think could be the home run threat in this game. We haven't seen Dwayne Eskridge since week 2. So it's really hard to predict who is going to have a big game for the receiver spot at Western Michigan. Does Eskridge return? There's a lot of fantasy owners that are holding on to him after his 200-yard game in the opener against Syracuse, and I think he saw the field, maybe had 2 receptions against Michigan. At this particular point, I don't know if I'd be willing to hold on to a guy like that. I don't have any injury news. We have not been able to get anything about Dwayne Eskridge, but you can only hold on to a guy that's given you nothing for so long. Let's see, guys. South Alabama playing on the road at Appalachian State. South Alabama at Appalachian State. And I think Jamarius Way, Kawan Baker are decent options this week. I don't think they're solid. They're playing against a pretty good Appalachian defense on the road. So I think that's obviously advantage Appalachian State. And you've got to get Jalen Moore, and Zach Thomas becomes a fantasy option for you this week. We're going to go over to Rice and Wake Forest. And, Austin Cantrell has been a nice sleeper find for some of you guys in deep FBS leagues. He's doing it running. He's doing it out of the backfield. He's a great complement to running back Emmanuel Isupka. I think Cantrell could be the guy with the bigger game this week. Wake Forest is going to score some points, but Wake Forest's defense hasn't exactly been shut down, which is good if you own Wake Forest players. So here's the names I'm going to run down. Greg Dortch, a must start, right? Sam Hartman is most likely in most 2 quarterback lineups. You've got Scotty Washington now, who is back. I think if you've got Cade Carney or Matt Colburn, they can be long shot running backs for this week. Each one of them are probably going to split carries. Alex Bachman, the other wide receiver, could be good for a touchdown catch and maybe 60 yards. And then also, guys, Kendall Hinton, the former quarterback, he's playing some wide receiver now, had a rushing TD last week, a 23-yard rushing TD, caught 3 passes for 23 yards, just another weapon in that offense. And all of a sudden now, Wake Forest's offense looks really good with some solid weapons. But Rice is going to have to keep up with them. And I think somebody like Austin Cantrell would be a nice sleeper pick in some of your deep FBS leagues. Purdue playing on the road at Nebraska right now. If I have Purdue players right now, I'm looking at Rondale Moore. He's definitely a must start. I'm giving consideration to maybe David Blah, the quarterback, and DJ Knox, the running back. And that's only because Nebraska has looked so bad up until this point. We'll see if they can turn a corner. If they're going to do it, it's going to be with Adrian Martinez. And if there's any other player for Nebraska, I'm giving consideration to. I'm staying away from the running backs. Maybe it's somebody like Stanley Morgan that I'm going ahead and getting into the roster, maybe J.D. Spielman. But I have to tell you, Nebraska just scares me right now. As far as this matchup is concerned, I'm rolling with Rondale Moore, maybe giving Blah some consideration. But until I know that Martinez is really healthy and they're doing anything, I think I'm going to stay away right now and just hold on to him, especially particularly if you're in a keeper league. Florida State playing on the road at Louisville, and look, guys, when it comes to Louisville, I've moved on. Running backs, receivers, they don't have the quarterback. You have to move on, and we're really close to that. Excuse me, with Florida State. I mean, Akers is giving you just enough of a heartbeat to hold on to him. But right now in this matchup, I would have never guessed in the beginning of the season that if we were to fast forward to week 5 and look at Florida State and Louisville, that the only thing that I would be telling you is that Cam Akers has somewhat of a pulse for fantasy football, and he was the only guy we were talking about. I would have never believed that. But that's where we are. There are a lot of unexpected things. Maybe more unexpected things that have happened this year with players than I can remember. Maybe in the 8 years that we've been a website. It has been a really, really strange year for some highly projected players at the beginning of the year. Southern Miss playing on the road at Auburn. I think when you're looking at Southern Miss, you're only considering two guys, Kez Watkins and Adams, the wide receiver. And I don't even know if you want to take a chance on them. Maybe in a PPR league with Watkins playing on the road at Auburn. With Auburn, Jatavius Whitlow definitely seems like the running back one, but the offense has not looked great at all. I would have thought that they would have fed the ball to Whitlow a little bit more last week, and I don't know, guys. It'll be interesting to see. Maybe the Auburn offense takes it up a notch this week, but I have to tell you, I think Southern Miss's defense is respectable. I'm going to be this. I mentioned earlier about Pitt being able to stay in the game against Central Florida. I almost feel like this is a game because of Southern Miss's run defense, which is better than what I thought. I'll be surprised if they get gouged this week. I think they can limit Whitlow. This could be a game where Whitlow tops 100, but maybe it takes him 25, 26 carries to hit that mark. And because of that, maybe Southern Miss stays in this game a little longer than most think. Tennessee State playing on the road at Vanderbilt. I love Kalijah Lipscomb this week. I don't know if there was a question that came in on Lipscomb or I had an email right before the show that had Lipscomb in it, but I really like him this week. I even think Kyle Shermer's a decent play for a 2-quarterback league this week. And, if you're looking for a long shot, Keyshawn Vaughn, the running back Vanderbilt, could be a decent long shot play this week. Obviously, if you've got Vanderbilt defense, you're going to want to get them in there as well. Nevada playing on the road at Air Force. I think when you look at Air Force, there's one player I'm looking at, Isaiah Sanders. If you have him, this would be a really good matchup to get him in. If you need a quarterback this week, this would be a good spot to pick him up and insert him as your quarterback too. And when you look at Nevada, you've got Ty Ganji, Mannix, Caleb Fossum at the wide receiver spot. You got Tawa, the running back. I actually think he is going to be a decent option this week. However, Air Force's deep run defense is pretty respectable. I wouldn't expect one of those, 80-yard, 3-touchdown games from Tawa. But if somebody's going to get it on the ground, it looks like he's emerging as their number one running back threat. And I think you could take a shot on him. That's definitely in a running back 3 or flex spot this week. Michigan playing on the road at Northwestern. I think if you have Karan Higdon, I think you go ahead and get him in the lineup. I think the fact that this game is at Northwestern, helps the Wildcats a little bit. But they have to be demoralized right now with the loss of Jeremy Larkin. And so I do think Karan Higdon, you get him in there. I wouldn't even hesitate to start Michigan's defense. A lot of emails coming in on who should you get in the absence of Jeremy Larkin. Is it going to be the freshman Isaiah Bowser coming in? Have they held off on him in the hopes of trying to redshirt, and now they have to burn that to get him in? I thought Bowser would be playing by now before the season started. Larkin has gotten exclusively so many of their carries that they haven't even given much to other people. John Moten IV seems like the logical choice to take over for Larkin, but I'm not sure he's the long-term answer. I grabbed Moten in one of my leagues. I recommended other guys and you guys to go get Moten as well. I don't know if Moten's going to end up giving you anything close that Jeremy Larkin did. We may wind up seeing a committee approach, but I think Moten's the guy you have to take a stab on. But personally, I don't have a lot of confidence that he is going to give us anything remotely close to what Larkin gave us. And so we may wind up holding on to him for a week or two and then realize the reality that he is not Jeremy Larkin, and we may have to let him go. But for the time being, the potential is there. We have to hold on to him, and I would put Isaiah Bowser, he was in our preseason fantasy guide, put him now on your watch list, and let's see what happens this weekend. I think we're not necessarily looking for success against the Michigan defense. We're looking to see how each guy gets utilized. And I think that is what we're probably looking at more than anything. So, Northwestern playing home against Michigan. We probably weren't if Jeremy Larkin was playing, we were going to start him. We're not starting anybody anyway from Northwestern now. So, just so people don't go haywire, when it comes to making a waiver claim, let's look at the utilization of Northwestern running backs this week, and let's hope that nobody runs for 200 yards, because then that guy will be, everybody will jump at him for the waiver wire. I'm interested to see how they get used. That will tell me their potential against opponents that don't have a defense against Michigan. And so that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I'm hoping for this weekend in that matchup. Florida playing on the road at Mississippi State. I did cover that one already. Utah playing on the road at Washington. I think if at Washington State, I still think you got to stick with Zach Moss. I think Tyler Huntley could be a play as a second quarterback option. Gardner Minshew at home playing against Utah. Utah respectable defense, but Washington State at home, I do think you have to get Minshew in that lineup. I think James Williams, the running back, you get him in there as well. Worst case scenario, a flex option. It's just wide receiver roulette, guys. And sometimes it's just, is it going to be Tay Martin? Is it going to be Calvin? Is it going to be Patman? Like it was, last week, Aesop Winston. It could be any one of those guys. So it could be wide receiver roulette. But I think if you have Gardner Minshew and you have James Williams, you get them in there. And if you have those other receivers and you're sticking them in there as a wide receiver 3 or a flex, it's worth the gamble, because you never know when you're going to get the 8 catches for 120 yards and a touchdown. So something to consider in that matchup as you move into the weekend, analyzing your roster depth. Liberty playing on the road at New Mexico. In this one, I would like to see Antonio Gandy Golden get back on track. 3 touchdowns in the opener. I would like to see him put something up this week. Could be a good matchup for him to do that. New Mexico, Tyrone Owens, I think this could be a good week for him. It's certainly a good matchup for him at home for New Mexico against Liberty. Arkansas State playing on the road at Georgia Southern. I think this is going to be the game where you want the quarterbacks. You're going to want Justice Hansen and you're going to want Shai Werts. To me, those are the 2 most valuable guys in this matchup, and that's what I'm looking for this week. I'm really kind of waiting for Justice Hansen to break out. His numbers are not as great as they were at the beginning of the year last year, but this could be the matchup that does it for him. Particularly, I think this is a tough matchup. I think Georgia Southern is going to give Arkansas State a little bit of a tussle, so we'll see how that shakes out. And I think this next game is going to be a little bit of a grind, too. Northern Illinois playing Eastern Michigan. I wouldn't have thought that a couple of months ago. Northern Illinois has played some tough opponents out of the gate. Eastern Michigan impressive, bringing the San Diego State to overtime last week, going all the way out to San Diego State and taking them to overtime. I think this could be a little bit of a grinded out game. Maybe Marcus Childers is the only play in this matchup, but I think right now, other than him, I don't know if I'm really taking a risk on any other player in that particular game. Virginia Tech playing at Duke, and here we go, another grind out matchup. I think it has potential to be a grind out matchup. I think with Duke, you've got Quentin Harris, the quarterback. I mean, we've seen, especially after what Old Dominion did to Virginia Tech last week, that there's potential for Duke to score some points in this game. I actually think Duke wins this game, but I do think, even though that Josh Jackson was lost for Virginia Tech, I'm not sure if Ryan Willis is going to be the answer, but maybe someone like Damon Hazelton, maybe a Stephen Peoples, the running back, could have a decent game. But I'm a little concerned about the Duke defense being a little tough on the road. I think Quentin Harris may be an option, but he'd be the only guy that I'm looking at in this. And I don't even know if I'm considering Britton Brown either this week, the running back for Duke. Houston Baptist playing on the road at SMU. It looked like James Proche came in and played the overtime possession to lead the Mustangs to victory. Will Brown got to start and played almost exclusively. I don't know if there's any injury behind that or if that was just a coach's preference because of an overtime pressure situation. For whatever reason, James Proche is definitely on track. If there's 2 guys that I want in this game, it is wide receiver James Proche and running back Braden West. If you have either of those 2 guys, get them in your lineups this week. UTEP playing on the road at UTSA, and that's just, I'll defer to the rankings for the players in that game. Florida Atlantic playing at Middle Tennessee. I think obviously it's all Devin Singletary for Florida Atlantic, maybe Jovan Durant, the wide receiver. I'm not a big fan of Chris Roberson right now, but I think Durant may be an option at the receiver position. When you look at Middle Tennessee, I actually think there's going to be a big week by a Middle Tennessee running back this week. I just don't know who it is. I don't know if Tavares Thomas is back. We'll see what happens, but that FAU run defense has not looked that good at all. Middle Tennessee's obviously going to want to pass the game with Brent Stockstill. You've got Patrick Smith, the wide receiver, C.J. Wyndham. To me, this is a make or break week for Ty Lee. Even if you still have Ty Lee on your roster, I know there are some fantasy owners that have cut ties with Ty Lee. I think this week will be the icing on top of the cake for those that are still holding on and holding out hope for Ty Lee. But it could be Patrick Smith. Looks like the best option for me. Maybe Brad Anderson's getting some touches. I don't know. We'll see what happens with Middle Tennessee this week at home against FAU, but I think we're going to get a lot of answers that we haven't gotten so far out of that Middle Tennessee offense. Boise State playing on the road at Wyoming. Nico Evans is supposed to be back, the running back for Wyoming. I'm a little hesitant to kind of throw him in there for two reasons. One, rib injury. It took him a little while to come back. And two, they're playing against a physical Boise State team. And I don't know if you want to take a chance on him aggravating that injury this week and leaving the game early when it's not a great matchup anyway. So Evans may actually be better on your bench. And I think over on the Boise State side too, I think this could be a tough matchup for Alexander Madison. But I think this is a matchup about Brett Rippon in the passing game. I think Brett Rippon is actually going to be a solid option, whether he goes to Richardson, whether he goes to Modster. I think there's going to be some opportunities in the passing game for Boise State this weekend. And if you have Madison, I think you get him in there, particularly as a running back 2, running back 3, maybe even a flex option. And hopefully he can give you 60, 70 yards and a touchdown on the ground. Maybe he can get back to catching some balls out of the backfield. But considering your running back depth, I would be considering Madison for this matchup. Hawaii playing on the road at San Jose State, and Hawaii has just been fantasy gold from Cole McDonald to John Ursua to Cedric Bird to JoJo Ward. I even think you got to throw Fred Holly in there, the running back in this matchup, playing at San Jose State. San Jose State, Nevins is going to be out, the running back. He's still out. But I think if there's two guys that you're looking at on the San Jose State side, because they're playing Hawaii, it would be Bailey Gaither, the wide receiver, and Josh Oliver, the tight end. Charlotte playing on the road at UAB. I do think you need to give Benny LeMay some consideration. Benny LeMay, compared to what I thought he was going to do last week, stunk. But the whole team for Charlotte did. They fell behind the UMass 28-0, which was something that I was not expecting. That did change the game plan a little bit. But I do think Benny LeMay is still a solid play this week playing at UAB. And I think you get Spencer Brown in your lineup this week for UAB. I think he's going to have a big week. And I do think A.J. Ertley can have a decent week for you too if you have him and you want to consider him as a quarterback too in some of your FBS leagues. Iowa State playing on the road at TCU. I think for Iowa State, I'm looking at two guys. It's David Montgomery and Hakeem Butler, and that's it. And I've got questions right now about Sean Robinson, the quarterback at TCU. He really needs a good game this week. Running backs, I'm staying away. I said that last week, even after Darius Anderson had that big run 2 weeks ago against Ohio State. Just uncertainty over with the TCU offense right now. You need to see consistency. If there's one player that I'm maybe jumping on board right now that I think has gotten targeted frequently and consistently, it's Jalen Reagor. He's the one guy for TCU that I like. But if you have to roll with Sean Robinson as a quarterback too, I think you could be okay this week. I'm not 100% confident in that pick, but as long as he stays in there and he performs and stops turning the ball over, then he's going to be good for some rushing yards for you as well too. But a little bit of a risky pick, I feel, with Sean Robinson this week. Penn State playing at home against Ohio State, and boy, that is going to be a big one. Here's the thing. I love Dwayne Haskins. I love Trace McSorley. I like Miles Sanders. I like J.K. Dobbins. And everybody else is just bells and whistles. Because I don't know if it's going to be Paris Campbell. I don't know if it's going to be K.J. Hill. I don't know if it's going to be McLaurin. Austin Hill. When you look at Penn State, I don't know if it's going to be Hamler. I don't know if it's going to be Juwan Johnson. But I do know what I'm getting with Haskins. I know what we're getting with McSorley. I know what we're getting with Sanders. And for the most part, I know what we're getting with Dobbins, and we're probably going to get a dose of Weber in there too. But you have to go with where the confidence lies. I think when you start throwing in guys like McLaurin, when you start considering guys like, of all the wide receiver options in this game, I think the one that makes the most sense, that I'm most comfortable with, is Paris Campbell. And I wouldn't have said that a year ago. Guy couldn't catch a cold. But he's the one that I think has consistently put up the better numbers of all the receivers in this matchup. So that's my take on the Ohio State-Penn State matchup. And then we've got, right after that, another good one. Stanford playing on the road at Notre Dame. Ian Book has basically given that Notre Dame offense a makeover. And I will draw a reference to the Kelly Bryants of the world with the Brandon Wimbushes as well. There's just some guys last year that we looked at and watched, and you said they're good. And on their best days, they're really good. But you just knew that Wimbush was not going to be the answer. And I'm not saying that Book is either, but he definitely has a better control and grasp of that system, so that they can be multifaceted in that offense. They do get Dexter Williams back this week. It'll be really interesting to see if Dexter Williams can get up into the second level of that Stanford defense. He's got potential for a big play. I don't think you're going to see a heavy dose of him, but he could be good for a big play. I think the emergence of tight end Alize Mack, I think Book's emergence has actually made Alize Mack a relevant tight end option in this matchup as well. And this is probably the matchup of tight ends. I mean, Mack is now relevant with Book at quarterback. And then over there at Stanford, we have the tight ends Caden Smith, and who's the other guy? Kobe Parkinson. He's relevant now. So you've got Whiteside. And I'm going to touch on Bryce Love too, because I do think that there are a number of emails coming in asking for suggestions about Bryce Love. This is really important about Bryce Love. So pay attention, because I gave some advice about Christian McCaffrey a couple of years ago, and it allowed many fantasy owners to take home their fantasy title. And this is what I'm going to say. Stanford's schedule, to me, and based on what I've seen from their offensive line up until this point, we're not seeing the Bryce Love of 2017. And we may not see it, but maybe once, twice over the next 5 or 6 weeks. However, if you look at Stanford's schedule at the end of the year, it's shaping up to make a nice 3-week run at the end of the year for Bryce Love, where I think he can explode. A couple of years ago, Christian McCaffrey was in the same situation. He wasn't doing much for fantasy owners. He was probably the top 5 pick in many preseason fantasy drafts. It wasn't playing out like that during the season. He was putting up very modest numbers. And I made a suggestion in my exclusive email at the end of the year and said, if you have McCaffrey, hold him, because he is going to be fantasy gold at the end of the year. And if you do not have Christian McCaffrey, great. Trade for him, because you're going to need him at the end of the year. And there were a lot of guys that took that advice, got Christian McCaffrey really cheap, and I think Christian McCaffrey just went off the last 3 weeks of the season and helped a lot of fantasy owners win their title. That's how I feel with Bryce Love right now. If you have him, hold him, because I think he's going to be really good if he stays healthy at the end of the year. You're just going to have to find a way to get to that playoff spot. And if you can get there, go check out Stanford's schedule those last 3 weeks. I think you're going to be in a really good spot to make a run with Bryce Love at the end of the year. So I know it's been frustrating. Fight through it, hold him, and he'll pay off for you at the end of the year. And that's my call with Bryce Love, as I did with Christian McCaffrey at the end of the year. We'll probably revisit this topic every week up until that point, and I will remind you guys, but I'm going to call that right now because I don't want anyone jumping ship on Bryce Love right now. Not too many matchups left, guys. South Carolina playing at Kentucky. What a surprise Kentucky's been. I think Benny Snell's a must start. I think Lynn Bowden is a potential sleeper wide receiver. He could be good for 4, 5, 6 catches for 70, 80 yards and a touchdown any week, but it's not a guarantee. Terry Wilson could be a wild card in this game as well, but South Carolina defense is respectable. I think Rico Dowdle, Debo Samuel, Brian Edwards are all the names you would consider, but I think you've got to really be in a Power 5 league, SEC only, maybe a 2-conference league to give anybody but Benny Snell serious consideration in this matchup to get in your fantasy rosters. Arkansas Pine Bluff playing at Florida International. I think Napoleon Maxwell and Shondarius Phillips could be some sleeper picks for you guys if you're looking to fill a hole in your running back spot this week in an FBS league. That would be 2 names for you. Louisiana Tech playing on the road at North Texas. Maybe Lauren Easley is the answer at running back for North Texas. I know I picked up Easley. I've got my faith in Easley. But you know what? Everything goes through Mason Fine and that passing game. I'm actually looking for better numbers this week from Jalen Guyton. Rico Bussey's been really solid. I think Guyton's due for a good game. We need to see Guyton get back on track for many of you guys that have him. Over at Louisiana Tech, I think Jacquizz Dancy's been really solid up until this point. I'll be curious to see what he can do this week on the road at North Texas. For me, the most notable thing with the Louisiana Tech offense is that Teddy Veal is not their top receiver. As a matter of fact, if I had Teddy Veal right now, I'll say it this way. Had I drafted Teddy Veal in my full FBS league, I would not have Teddy Veal on my roster. I actually own Adrian Hardy right now. I think Adrian Hardy is the best wide receiver to have in that Louisiana Tech offense, and I can see Adrian Hardy having a big week this week. Jamar Smith has been surprising. He's looked good. He's actually looked improved compared to last year, and that's a good sign for the Louisiana Tech offense as we get into the middle and end of the year. Marshall playing on the road at Western Kentucky. The one thing that I'll say about Marshall, I think Tyree Brady, the wide receiver, is a start. The running game does not look the same. Obviously, the offensive coordinator is different. Here's the only question that I have. Whatever happened to Alex Thompson, the quarterback, the graduate transfer from Wagner? I know that he had a shoulder injury. It was taking him a while to get back. Last week, Marshall was getting blown out. I think it was last week, Marshall was getting blown out. We didn't see Alex Thompson at all. So here's the question. If we haven't seen Alex Thompson in a matchup like that where there was a chance to get him snaps, will we see Alex Thompson at all anytime soon? Isaiah Green, I think if you have him, you could feel comfortable that he's probably going to be the quarterback at least for a few more weeks. BYU playing on the road at Washington. I'm looking at Squally Canada. I don't know if he's a solid start this week at Washington. I would have my concerns. I had my concerns when they played at Wisconsin a couple of weeks ago, and he still found the end zone twice. But I mean, it's kind of like catching lightning in a bottle twice. I don't know if I trust BYU at Washington to get Canada in there, even though he did something on that road trip at Wisconsin. And I think Myles Gaskin, you have to start him this week. You have to get Myles Gaskin in. He's a must start. Myles Gaskin has Myles Gaskin has only scored in 2 of 4 games this year. Last year, Myles Gaskin scored in all but 1 game. So he's not scored in 2 games this year. That's more games than he never scored in last year. He only didn't find pay dirt 1 time in all of last year. LSU playing at home against Ole Miss. I think Nick Brossette is definitely a must start. I think given Ole Miss's defense, you could even take a chance with, Clyde Edwards-Helaire at a flex spot if you really want to get him. I think LSU can find some points in this game. And I think if you're Ole Miss, a lot of questions coming in about A.J. Brown, saying A.J. Brown's not in the rankings. Well, A.J. Brown was in the rankings. For you guys listening to the show that have the expanded rankings, he just wasn't in the top 40. You know, DK Metcalf right now looks to be the more explosive receiver in the Ole Miss offense. Now, it's no mistake that A.J. Brown has had some injuries leading up into the season or at the beginning of the season. I think that has contributed to him sort of looking like, and not saying he's taken us playing second fiddle, but I think maybe that's why DK Metcalf has just looked a little better. Is A.J. Brown fully healthy? I don't know. So A.J. Brown is still solid. He's still going to have to be accounted for, and he's still going to put up some really good numbers. I just don't know how explosive Ole Miss's offense can be against LSU's defense in Death Valley. I think they'll be a little more methodical. I think they'll move the ball better than they did against Alabama for sure. And I think they'll score some points against LSU. I just don't know if we're looking at an Ole Miss that can score 20, four touchdowns at LSU. So I do think Ole Miss is going to find a way to get into the end zone. I just don't think it's going to be with Scotty Phillips, and I think it's going to be in the passing game. And maybe this is one of those games where maybe Lodge scores as a touchdown. Maybe it's AJ Brown gets one, and maybe Metcalf scores one. Maybe each one of those guys all score a touchdown. I don't know. It's kind of like Syracuse playing on the road at Clemson. I think Syracuse is going to score. I'm just not confident telling you where it's going to come from. But if I had to put money on it, I would say Metcalf and Brown would be the two guys that are going to find the end zone for Ole Miss. Oregon State playing on the road at Arizona State. Jamar Jefferson, I don't like this matchup for him. I know he's been really solid up until that point, and that Oregon State offense is looking good. But I have to tell you, I've been really impressed with Arizona State. Arizona State came into the season a supposed dumpster fire. I mean, I don't know if any coach got ridiculed more, any school got ridiculed about a hire than Arizona State did with Herm Edwards. I have to tell you, I've watched Arizona State play twice. I've actually been impressed with them. I think they're really solid. I think they could surprise somebody this year. I mean, they already beat Michigan State, but I do like Arizona State. I do think Arizona State is going to handle Oregon State pretty good this weekend, and I do think N'Keal Harry, you get him in. And Eno Benjamin, for as high as we have him in the rankings this week, may actually be higher. He could be a top 5 fantasy running back this week. Oregon playing on the road at Cal. I think Tony Brooks-James is banged up. It looks like C.J. Verdell is the number 1 guy. Very unfortunate that C.J. Verdell had that fumble because his confidence level would probably be through the roof right now. But I still think if you have him, you still get him a start at Cal. Oregon's run defense has been pretty respectable up until this point. That does make me hit the pause button on Patrick Laird, but as you know, everything goes through Patrick Laird in that Cal offense, and hopefully they can get back to putting the ball in his hands, not only on the ground, but in the air as well. And so they're going to need a heavy dose of Patrick Laird this week at home. Good spot for Cal because they may be catching an Oregon team sleeping, coming off of sleepwalking into Berkeley, coming off a very emotional loss at home, heartbreaking loss at home to Stanford last week. Oregon, USC playing on the road at Arizona, and Malapay looks like he's going to be the top running back right now over Stephen Carr. That's another one that we just didn't see coming. It looked like Carr, and you hear the stories, Carr's got all the potential in the world, but it's just not coming through on the field this year. And I just don't know if we're doing more with Stephen Carr. Last week, I made a suggestion to bench him, but hold him and not drop him. I don't know how long you can continue to hold him and not drop him up until this point. And maybe this matchup against Arizona will be the tipping point, much like it is with Ty Lee at Middle Tennessee. Maybe this is a make-or-break week if you are in a redraft league and own Stephen Carr right now, if you still have him. Over at Arizona, I'm not expecting a repeat performance from J.J. Taylor. I'm expecting a decent performance from Khalil Tate. I think this is, from this moment on, is the point where a lot of fantasy owners saying I should have traded Khalil Tate in week 3 and week 4 when he had decent matchups. If you have Khalil Tate after this weekend, I think you're going to be stuck with him. But we have not seen the 2017 Khalil Tate. I have no faith that we're going to see the Khalil Tate from 2017 in 2018. And I just have a feeling Khalil Tate will be no better than a quarterback 2 in 2018. And then last but not least, Toledo playing on the road at Fresno State. I think Keyshawn Johnson could be a solid option at receiver for Fresno State. I think Mims, the running back, McMarion, the quarterback, could be some decent options. And a lot of that's really going to depend on how many points Toledo can score, which we know that they are capable of scoring between Mitchell Guadagni, who looks to be the most legitimate rushing threat on that team. And that's not good news if you own Shaquille Seymour. I do think Shaquille Seymour will be better as we get into conference play, but I have to tell you, he's been a disappointment too. You were expected to get a lot more from Shaquille Seymour, and after I saw that game last week with Mitchell Guadagni getting all those rushing yards, all I kept thinking was, man, I'll tell you, The owners of Shaquille Seymour right now just must be sick to their stomach because Guadani was hogging up all the rushing yards. And so that's just a reality you live with. Deontay Johnson and Cody Thompson are going to be solid fantasy options for that Toledo offense as we get in the conference play. And that pretty much wraps up the matchups every week here. So I am going to jump right into the start bench, and I'm going to get over to some of you questions that you posted here. So thanks everybody for coming in this week. We're going to get right rolling into the week 5 start bench. I'm going to start off with the bench list. Some of these you could probably tell were going to be inevitable at the way that I talked about them when I was going through the matchups. But number 1 on the list, Eric Dungey, quarterback, Syracuse, at Syracuse this week. Dungey has gotten off to a solid start this season, accounting for 3 or more touchdowns in 3 of Syracuse's first 4 games and has led the Orange to a 4-0 record. However, the team's unblemished record will likely come to an end this weekend at Clemson. The Tigers defense ranks 16th in the FBS in points allowed. They rank 9th in passing yards allowed and 4th in total yards allowed. I think that's a bad recipe if you're trying to get Eric Dungey into your lineup and he's a week 5 bench at Clemson. Trey Regis, the running back, Louisiana at Lafayette, playing at Alabama. And I know some of you guys are like, all right, Joe, that's an easy one. That's a no-brainer. Well, let me just say this. For seasoned college fantasy football veterans, for seasoned college fantasy football owners, it's probably laughable that I would say that and that we've even included him on the bench list this week against Alabama. But I have to tell you, and this is we've been really pleasantly surprised over at the College Fantasy Football site about the amount of support that the website has gotten from first-year fantasy owners this season. So even though the sophomore back has topped the 100-yard mark in 2 of the first 3 games this year in 2018, it's not going to be fun to watch Regis chasing garbage points at the end of the game. And so for all you new guys, the rule of thumb basically is when you're playing against Alabama, most of the time you are going to sit the opposing running backs. Squally Canada, running back, BYU playing on the road at Washington. Now, I mentioned this earlier. Squally Canada was on our bench list 2 weeks ago when BYU played at Wisconsin, and he proved us wrong by rushing for a season-high 118 yards and 2 touchdowns in their upset win against the Badgers. We certainly don't want to be wrong again, but it does make sense to keep Canada out of your active roster on the road at Washington this weekend. And despite playing 3 quality FBS opponents, Washington has played Auburn, they've played Utah, and they have played Arizona State. They are only allowing 148 rushing yards per game on the ground, and they're only allowing 12.8 points per game. And so I do think Squally Canada is a week 5 bench on the road at Washington. John Moten IV, running back, Northwestern versus Michigan. I mentioned this when I talked about the matchup. Earlier this week, we learned that Jeremy Larkin retired from football after he was diagnosed with cervical stenosis, right? His departure definitely leaves a gaping hole in the Northwestern running game. And check this number out, guys. Jeremy Larkin accounted for 346 of Northwestern's 351 net rushing yards through their first 3 games. 346 of their 351 rushing yards. If that doesn't leave a hole, I don't know what does. The obvious choice to fill the void is John Moten IV, but without much of a proven sample size, it would be wise to grab Moten off the waiver wire and assess his utilization against Michigan before inserting him into your active roster, which was the advice that I gave when we were going over the games. John Moten IV, running back Northwestern, a week 5 bench. And the last player on the bench list, Jordan Ellis, running back Virginia, playing on the road at North Carolina State. Now listen to the stats on Jordan Ellis. In the first 4 weeks of the season, Jordan Ellis has run for 448 yards and 5 touchdowns. In his 2 games against non-Power 5 teams, he has totaled 317 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. Against Power 5 schools, Indiana and Louisville, he only totaled 131 yards on the ground and has not found the end zone. This weekend, Virginia travels to North Carolina State, and they're going to face a Wolfpack defense that has given up just over 100 yards per game on the ground, 108, and have only allowed 1 rushing touchdown in 3 games. I do think Bryce Perkins is a start, but I definitely do not think Jordan Ellis is worth a start this weekend on the road at North Carolina State. So that takes care of the bench list, guys. We're going to get quickly going into the start list. And my number one player is Taquan Marshall, quarterback, Georgia Tech, playing at home against Bowling Green. And listen to this matchup. Listen to how sweet some of these matchups are on the start list. So please take heed to this advice. I really think we're going to nail the start list this week. Taquan Marshall has rushed for at least one touchdown in each of Georgia Tech's first 4 games this year. He has topped the 100-yard rushing mark in 2 of the last 3 games and has carried the ball 53 times in the past 2 weeks. Expect him to shoulder the load this weekend when they host Bowling Green. The Bowling Green Falcons, have the worst run defense in the FBS. They're giving up 333 yards per game on the ground, and they have given up 15 rushing touchdowns. That is screaming start Taquan Marshall, quarterback, Georgia Tech. Desmond Ridder, quarterback, Cincinnati, playing at home against UConn. And if you're a fantasy owner that likes to take advantage of weekly matchups, then Desmond Ridder is the quarterback for you in week 5. On Saturday, Cincinnati travels to UConn. I thought they were home, but they still travel to UConn, but they face the worst statistical defense in the FBS. UConn has given up 664 yards per game. That's not a mistake. 664 yards per game and 54.5 points per game. That's horrible. This matchup against UConn comes at a perfect time for Ridder's fantasy owners, as the freshman quarterback is brimming with confidence after accounting for 7 touchdowns, 5 passing, and 2 rushing in the past 2 games. Get Desmond Ridder. Him and Michael Warren are going to be a great 1-2 punch this weekend playing on the road at UConn. Kalijah Lipscomb, wide receiver, Vanderbilt, playing at home against Tennessee State. And over the years, we have not had many opportunities to put a Vanderbilt player on our start list, but this is one of those weeks. Kalijah Lipscomb has caught at least 9 passes in each of the past 3 games and has scored in 3 of Vanderbilt's first 4 games of 2018. But you know what? He hasn't registered a 100-yard game yet. Tennessee State's averaging 37.5 points per game this season, so they may hang around long enough for Lipscomb and the Commodores offense to do some damage in the air. Kalijah Lipscomb, week 5 start at home against Tennessee State. Tyrone Owens, New Mexico, versus Liberty. In his first 3 seasons at New Mexico, Tyrone Owens had never carried the ball more than 18 times in any one game. And in 3 games this season, Owen has carried the ball at least 20 times on 2 occasions. If he gets another heavy dose of carries this weekend, fantasy owners are going to get rewarded. Liberty is one of 3 teams in the FBS that are giving up over 300 yards per game on the ground. Tyrone Owens, the running back New Mexico, is a must start this week. And last but not least, guys, I said he had potential to be finished higher in the rankings than where I have him. Eno Benjamin, running back, Arizona State, playing at home against Oregon State. On the season, Eno Benjamin has rushed for 283 yards and 2 touchdowns. He's had 18 receptions for 127 yards and a touchdown as a receiver out of the backfield. His numbers have been solid so far, especially when you consider he has faced the top 2 statistical rush defenses in the country, Michigan State and San Diego State. They sit 1-2 in rushing defense. Eno Benjamin with those stats, even after facing those defenses. On Saturday, he faces the 4th worst rush defense in the nation, Oregon State. They're giving up 280 yards per game on the ground. Eno Benjamin is going to go off. Eno Benjamin is a must start in week 5 at home against Oregon State. And that wraps up your start bench, guys. Let me go ahead and get to some of these questions real quick. We're doing pretty good on time this week. Could you list the favorite plays overall at the end of the video? That I kind of think the start bench is the list of my overall plays. I gave you sleepers all through any value. Rakeem Boyd. I don't know what you're going to get from Rakeem Boyd this year. I don't even know if he's maybe just a stopgap fill-in for Dev Walweli, but the whole Arkansas offense scares me. I'm kind of staying away from Arkansas right now. Need 2 to start. At wide receiver, Power 5 only. Mims from Baylor, not favorable right now. Lipscomb from Vanderbilt, I think I just answered the question for him. Humphrey from Texas, or Butler from Iowa State. And I have to tell you, it comes down for me right now because of Mims. I don't know if he's healthy, on whether or not I'm going to go with Hakeem Butler or I'm going to go with Low Jordan Humphrey. I'll tell you this. Iowa State's going to have to throw the ball. I don't know if Texas will. It's hard to, it's a coin flip out of those guys. If I had to pick one, I would just go with Butler because he is the number one target, where Colin Johnson could get targeted for Texas as well. Scotty Phillips, Trey Sermon, or Marcus Outlaw need one. And I think right now you have to take the running back in the Oklahoma offense that seems to be getting all the carries exclusively, as long as everybody else is banged up. And do you like Mason Fine or Kellen Mond this weekend? I like them both, guys. I think from a dual threat purpose, dual threat ability, you have to go with Kellen Mond. But I said the Arkansas defense has been respectable, not great. And I just think that Fine right now has been very steady, very, very consistent. And if you need 350 and 3 touchdowns, he's almost good for it every week. So, guys, that takes care of the rundown for week 5. Thank you guys for coming in and joining the show live, as you always do. Shoot away more questions if you have to. If you need to send in more emails, send them in. Week 5 is here. The regular season is almost halfway over right now. Thanks all of you guys for jumping in. I hope this show really helps out. Thanks for all the support with the website. Thanks for all the support with the expanded rankings, the exclusive email. Keep an eye on the projections. All you guys that are out there that help us fine tune it by finding little things here or there that we miss. Much, much, much thanks to all you guys. Listen, have a good week this week. We'll be talking next week. Good luck to everybody and have a great weekend, guys.